It's great to be doing a panel on privacy as you're getting flashed with cameras coming up and attacking you. So, we'll do it in return the whole way through the panel.
In fact, privacy is not a substance. It's not something you can trade in little bits or divide up. Privacy means, as Dana said, many, many more things in various different contexts. And fundamentally, one of the things I think you're going to take out of this panel is the notion that privacy itself is a bad word for what we mean, because we mean so many different things. We're stuck with this 19th century word because we haven't come up with a better, pithy word or phrase that actually describes the broad range of concerns that people have about the collection and distribution, use and abuse of information about them.
For most of history, nothing was recorded. Almost everything that happened was very, very ephemeral. And so a lot of these transformations, while they're being accelerated by things like online data, it's the camera that, you're all sitting here photographing us. So, we can sit here and photograph you, and, a lot of these pictures are going to end up marked up on Facebook and everything. And, we know that you were here. This seems like a fairly innocuous experience for most of you. But through most of history, it's been very, very hard to make this kind of record. And so we're also just coming to grips with understanding what does it mean for things to have this type of continuity over time where you can't continuously recreate. So those two things are in tension with each other in a very interesting way.
Every social context, whether it's your home or your work, or like a particular, a literal interaction you have with one person, that's a particular social context. So the way that information flows in that context is totally context specific. So let's give a couple of examples. So first, if I tell my doctor, something about, a medical issue I'm having, and that piece of information goes into my medical records, I'm totally fine with that, right? That's very appropriate for the context, there's no problem. If the doctor then goes around and tells her best friend, oh, I had this woman come into the ER saying something totally weird happened, that I would consider to be a violation, because the information is moving from one context to the other, and the norms that govern it in one context are not the same as the norms that govern it in another context.
When we deal with what's public and private in, big public spaces, there's all kinds of cultural assumptions about that. When you go into a restaurant, you might be seated next to another table and you can kind of overhear their conversation, but we have norms about saying you really don't butt in and tell the other people what you think about their opinion of that movie. Even if you know you're right and they're wrong, we just don't do it. We pretend that there's a wall and we can't hear them.
That privacy and all of these meanings have been ruptured by all of the new technology that we've seen. What does it mean when you're on Facebook or MySpace and you're trying to negotiate different audiences? And how do you negotiate privacy when you don't necessarily have a control over how far your information spreads? And how do we deal with these different approaches?
One of the biggest contemporary issues around privacy is around things like Facebook, where everybody is suddenly aware of the notion of how many different public faces they have. That you have a public face for the people at work, you have a public face for different groups of friends, and if you start writing status updates on Facebook, all of a sudden you're creating, so you have to be doing it with one large audience in mind. Or a lot of what's fascinating about Facebook is you get to see people's faces that were normally private to you, and you couldn't see them before because they're speaking to a different audience.
The more information you put out there about yourself, the more useful that is to corporate interests, to marketers, to companies like Google, to data miners. And if you are putting out a lot of information about yourself, I'm checking in on Foursquare or whatever, that I'm at this place, and these are my 50 favorite books on Goodreads, and this is my Amazon, wish list. All this information can be aggregated nowadays in a way that it couldn't be 20 years ago. And so that kind of creates these profiles of people that are very, very valuable. I've had people tell me, I don't believe in a separation of public and private, but they will also tell me that there are certain things they would never put online. I had one of my informants tell me that because she puts so many personal things online, people think she's putting everything online. And that allows her to kind of keep some things completely to herself, because everyone's like, oh, she's so open that of course, then she would tell us if something else was going on. But it is about, like Judith was saying, about sort of constructing these particular senses of self.
I think we all use Gmail, don't we? No, you don't? All right, good. She's the one, right? I do, and I should know better, except that I actually don't mind what Google does with my personal information. I get the transaction. I'm just not sure everybody does, nor do I think everyone should have to, right? So that's what's really key here, is getting a very clear sense of what we give up and what we get.
all the searches that you have made, the different things that you do on Gmail, plus the information that you've put up voluntarily. It's an extraordinarily fabulous, beautiful portrait of you, but it's not something that any of us have ever had a chance to look at. And I think the ability to be able to see that would give people the ability to make a much more informed choice of how they wanted that to look and when they really wanted to control pieces of it.
Personal information is a form of currency, right? It clearly has value assessed and attached to it. It does more so in the aggregate than in the individual case, but it's still true. Now, if that's true, and I'm actually creating currency every day with my movements in the world, shouldn't I have some stake in how it's used? If I don't receive a specific remuneration for it, which another company will by aggregating it and milling it, that's one thing, and I don't expect to. But I do expect to be able to at least be aware of the extent to which my information is being used and abused. And that we have not created